Howdy, it's AL-BINO here, recovering from some nasty crud that really just kind of made me sick for a number of days. So, we're going to go back to what if Alt hissed and his prediction that there will be some type of a civil conflict between now and, well, he says between now and April. It might be the beginnings of that, maybe. But I believe that it's probably, I'd like to extend his forecast out for at least a year, if not more. And let me tell you why. Bleeding Kansas. Kind of. Now, there is what we've called a culture war and a social political type culture war been simmering in the background now for at least the past 50 years, actually the past 60 years, because it's been going since the 1960s. It started between the boomers when they were young people and the World War II / silent generation back in the 1960s during that cultural revolution. Cultural revolution. So it started as a combative spirit even back then, okay? Now, this culture war that's been going on, we could liken it to the conflict or the state of conflict between abolitionists and slaveholders, in the decades leading up to the American Civil War. Kind of the same type of aspect or background, right? Where even the founding fathers, a lot of them were slave owners, but they saw that being a slave owner was not conducive to the principles which they had set forth. And actually, many of them either during their lifetime or upon their deaths, did actually free the slaves that they owned. And some of them, it wasn't legal to do so on paper because of the legal structure in the South at the time in places like Virginia. Some of them lived as common law spouses or fell in love with, a black person or a slave that they either owned or that was a free black person, and maintained common law relationships and actually inherited the children from that relationship into their estate. Thomas Jefferson, Sarah Hemings. Here's the dirty part about that a lot of people don't talk about, and it's not so dirty. They like to throw dirt on it. Yes, she was his slave. Yes, she was his wife's caretaker until his wife died. But after his wife died, they became romantically involved. Now, by Virginia law, okay, at the time, that wasn't legal, and that's how people often try to make the backwards argument that was some type of statutory rape. But here's the thing. I visited Monticello. I read a lot of the documents that are there in Monticello regarding the Jefferson family. And because Sarah and Thomas could not legally be married in Virginia, he kind of kept her as a slave to protect her legal status in his household, but they lived as a common law couple, and he had children by them. Now, when Monticello was donated to the Daughters of the Revolution, and I forget the year, it was donated to the Daughters of the Revolution by a black family named Jefferson. And the family says that their relationship was loving, consensual. They could not legally be married, but she wanted to stay in his household, so he kept her as a slave. And to protect the people on his plantation in Antebellum, Virginia, from unfriendly people, he maintained their status as slaves, but he granted them pretty much the liberty to do whatever they wanted to do, to live however they wanted to live. They were not forced to work or labor. And this is not me excusing Thomas Jefferson at all. This is me just telling you what the situation was. And when he passed away, he freed all of his slaves, but he did this. He inherited his estate to the two sons and to Sarah once he freed them, to the house and to the buildings surrounding the house. And then he also, when he freed all of his slaves at his death, in his will, inherited portions of that estate to each one of the slave families. So in essence, when he died and he could no longer protect them in Virginia by his own status as an owner, he freed them, and then he inherited all of them a portion of land on his estate, all of them, to include his children, so that way they could be free blacks who owned property, which it wasn't the same as a white person in Virginia of his day, but it did give them a status that afforded them a level of protection legally. Now, what was I talking about? Oh, okay, yes. So, yeah, when they donated Monticello, those families, all by the name of Jefferson, to include the descendants of his two sons, who once he freed them and inherited them the mansion and a portion of that, along with the other slave families that he owned. He also allowed them, while they were his children and his slaves, to become tradesmen. So I think one was a farrier and one was a blacksmith. So that way, once they were free and they were property owners, they had a trade. Do you see what I'm getting? So the slave economy being what it was back then, that was the best way he could do to protect and to look out for the black people that he loved. Washington, most of his slaves were through Sarah Custis, so he could not free them. But the ones that he did free, he inherited to them portions of his Mount Vernon estate, and likewise allowed them, or likewise while he was still alive, encouraged them to learn trades and stuff like that, so that way they could be freedmen with property in a trade as well. So the founding fathers aren't quite the Satans that they were made out to be. They did what they could within the legal structure of their time to begin to move forward the principles in which they believed in. Now, as far as the underbrewing spirit of conflict between the slaveholders and the abolitionists, we'll call the boomers the slaveholders, we'll call the traditionalists the abolitionists. Why? Because the abolitionists believed in the spirit of the founding documents, and by that tradition, they wanted to make sure that everybody within the borders of the United States were able to live by the precepts that were laid forth in those documents. And the founding fathers did what they could within the structure of their legal and social environments at their time prior to that to try to demonstrate that out. Just made that case for you. And if you don't believe me, go to Mount Vernon, go to Monticello, and have them pull the records for you and see for yourself. Okay? So the counter-revolutionaries of the time would be the planters, the slave owners. Now, Andrew Jackson, everybody thinks that Trump is a Jacksonian. No, he's not. He's a Jeffersonian. Okay? So think of Trump and his views on black people like Jefferson viewed the black people that he tried to protect and then set up for success on his own plantation, and then eventually owned his plantation after he passed, and were able to pass it down to a historical society early in the 20th century. Oh yeah, they forget to tell you about that, right? So Trump is the traditionalist. He's a Jeffersonian. But everybody's like, well, how come he has a picture, or had a picture of Andrew Jackson on the wall in the Oval Office? And I've made this point before. You never want to forget the face of your enemy. Andrew Jackson did more to destroy the traditions of the founding of this country than any other president before the Civil War. Look at what he did to the Native Americans. You look at what he did in regards to once he conquered land from the Cree in the Chickasaw to further plantation establishment of the plantation culture. Okay? So these planters then became the counter-revolutionaries because they wanted to carry on something that was contradictory to the principles that the founding fathers tried to inculcate in our traditional freedom-minded society. And even they themselves tried to live out and cause change in, or cause positive action in, through their own examples, like Jefferson setting up and then eventually freeing his charges and his own family that he had, and affording them protection and forward progress. In Washington, with the portion of charges that he had, that he could set free and set up for success, that he did as well. The planters were antithetical to that. Okay? What do we know about boomer counterculture outside of those who went to Vietnam? Thank you very much. And the ballyhoo generation, which would include Lyndon Baines Johnson, that informed them and steered them counter to the American tradition. especially that inculcated by the World War II and silent generations that were the heroes of World War II in Korea. We want to take down the man. Equal outcomes for everybody, man. See, here's the thing, right? I've gone into, in my videos before, about how the World War II generation and the silent generation were the civil rights generations. Largely because of their experiences both here and abroad during World War II and the Korean War. And by those experiences, over the 20 years following those conflicts, they pushed hard for equal rights. Not equal outcomes, equal rights for all people. Because they realized that without the contribution of key black units like the Red Tails and key Native American units like the Navajo Code Talkers, that World War II would not have been won. If it wasn't for black people in Detroit, in Chicago, in Indiana, and in Denver, and Oklahoma City, working side by side with white people in the war factories here at home, and everybody realizing, oh, we can live and work together to be successful during the World War II manufacturing push. Even those people, after that, wanted to push for equal status for everybody because they saw it, they lived it, and they knew the only right thing to do was to realize that, hey, these people are just like me, and we should all live together, and everybody should have an equal opportunity and equal protection under the law. That was the World War II generation, silent generation mindset. And they were the drivers of civil rights. The counterculture, started by the boomers, sought to do just the opposite. To divide so that way we could be conquered, just like Yuri Brizmanov said. It was the aim of our enemies, external, to divide us, then to conquer us by weakening us from within and sowing the seeds of dissension, and revolution, not American-type revolution, chaotic type, Jacobin, French revolutionary, Bolshevik revolutionary type revolution. To set the seeds for a communist, feudalist society. In other words, to regress us back to the society from which we came out of during the Enlightenment. So the boomer culture in the 60s up until the present has been about equal outcomes. Stuff like eat the rich, or rooted in envy and jealousy, feminine qualities, right? Versus the mentality of, well, never got a job from a poor person, that's a fact. Now, they took legitimate concerns such as the rights for people who are employed and sell their time and talents to an employer not to be abused. Okay, yeah. They took those to an extreme and leveraged those, or leveraged what was perceived as past inequalities of certain demographic groups to divide. If you look at, I like watching like old Clint Eastwood movies and old Mel Brooks movies. Mel Brooks actually made fun of this stuff in Blazing Saddles. And he used a black actor to do it because the point that Mel Brooks was trying to make was, to the boomers, was, hey, your agitation is ridiculous. Okay? And he used a black actor to do this. And a Jewish actor, Gene Wilder, from a Jewish director. Yeah, it was rapid comedy, but the whole parody is that the boomer counterculture was fucking ridiculous. Okay? Or you look at the old Clint Eastwood Magnum series movies, where when he would build a black character, that black character was just, or a female character, was just a partner, an equal partner to Harry Callahan. Versus somebody who was to be given special status, or somebody who was going to work counter to some type of a social narrative. And actually the whole Harry Callahan's series also was a critique of the boomer counterculture. Clint Eastwood is a silent generation guy. And a Korean War veteran. He didn't actually go to Korea, but he was in the military during the time. He was stationed stateside, so he came out of the same culture as a World War II generation, and he was part of the culture that drove the real civil rights movement, which was, hey, let's just make sure that these people are treated the same as everybody else. See the difference? In his first Dirty Harry movie, which happens to be my favorite one, and actually my other favorite one, which is, was it Sudden Impact? The criminals there that happen to be black people in that movie, he's pointing to the fact that those people taking on that cultural role was not good for them. In other words, you know, he would have to deal with the psychotic elements of those people, or a psychotic, you know, extremist white man, and put them down because it was dangerous to the culture as a whole. But he had a black partner who was his friend. He had a female partner who was his co-equal and helped him. He had an Italian boss who he sometimes had conflict with, but pretty much had his back. So in the Dirty Harry series, what you see is the traditional people trying to put down the psychosis of the counterculture. And the traditional people were people from all walks of life, trying to put down, trying to exterminate the ridiculous counterculture and criminal element, because it was a danger to society at large, even if it was not viewed as politically correct. Because check this out, right? In Dirty Harry, one of the key things in that movie, and it's a very small scene, is there's a black gay guy in the park, and he's just having an ice cream cone, minding his business, and he was a target of the psychotic counterculture guy, and Harry had to protect him. Unfortunately, the counterculture guy took out the black gay guy, who was just a regular black gay guy in a park, full of families and children playing and everything else, minding his business, having a nice day with an ice cream cone. But the psychotic counterculture guy, who in this film happened to be white, was a threat to him. So let's go back to the whole counterculture thing brewing, okay? So this has been brewing for a long time. The last of the great presidents in my lifetime was Ronald Reagan. I'm a Generation X guy. The older millennials remember this guy too. They were little bitty kids, but they remember him. And if they don't remember him correctly, they remember the society that he facilitated, which lasted for about 15 years, in spite of the political and social changes of the boomers, which after him and his vice president started to take political prominence, it endured on for about another 15 years or so. So they lived in the Reagan world, right? So us Gen Xers and the older millennials, we see this. Okay? The next great president of the same caliber as Ronald Reagan that we lived under was, in fact, Donald Trump. And Gen X put him in office in 2016. And we sure as hell put him in office this time around. But the boomer counterculture, 60-year-old counterculture narrative, because they're now, up until recently, their cohort, their social political construct has been in power since 1993. It's taken such a death grip on the machine that it's going to take a level of conflict to undo it. And what if all the hist is right? And the more that I'm saying this, the more I'm willing to say he is correct. It's going to require an order of physical conflict in order to do this. I liken this to Pinochet having to do what he did for 16 years to undo Allende. The only difference between Pinochet and what Trump is going to have to do, is going to have to be forced into doing because of the situation, is Pinochet was a military general that pretty much just took power. It's a good thing for Chile that he did, because in the 16 years that he did, he pretty much rooted out communism in his country. And pretty much he had to. I mean, everybody's like, well, he was mean and he killed people. And he had to do it, okay? Because it was not going to go down quiet. And Chile, as a result today, is a free, strong, free market economy, stable country because of the drastic and sometimes violent things that Pinochet had to do in order to root the cancer out of that economy and society. So we look at the Donald Trump situation, and already we have states and cities who are saying, well, we're just not going to cooperate, or we're going to actively resist. Okay? And then we have factions in Washington, D.C., mostly in the Democrats, but even some of the old rhinos who are saying the same thing, and in the Pentagon, and da-da-da. So, the first person Donald Trump, the first two people actually that he's going to have to get confirmed is Pam Bondi and Pete Hegseth, okay? And Bondi, the minute she turns around, she's going to have to start prosecuting in Congress, in the Senate, and in the House. She's going to have to start prosecuting in Congress and in the House. And her play is going to be, okay, for the Democrats, she's just going to start having to nail them. Prosecution. For the rhinos, she's going to have to play this book. You either cooperate or I'm going to prosecute you too. Because a lot of these rhinos are filthy dirty as well. With Hegseth, what he's going to have to do is Hegseth is going to have to nationalize the National Guard from the red states, and the red states only. Then he's going to have to come after the Pentagon, and he's probably going to have to go after these red states by force. Okay? You either, like the whole deal with Tom Holman. Well, Holman can't prosecute or forcefully go after people in, for example, New Mexico or in Colorado, in Denver specifically, or in Houston or in Chicago or wherever these governors or these mayors are going to either resist or use their agencies and even their own law enforcement, perhaps even their own National Guard, to forcefully resist the actions of Holman. He's going to need Hegseth and those red state National Guards. And Hegseth is going to have to start forcefully dealing with people in the Pentagon. Next that's going to have to come down is Gabbard. But she's not going to be confirmed until Bondi starts having her way and Hegseth starts having his way in the Pentagon. And once Tulsi gets it, her office isn't going to be in Washington. Her office is going to actually be in Arizona. Because that's where that department or that division is headquartered out of. Okay? And I know where that office is. I was stationed on that base. But that office in Arizona controls Langley. It controls the DIA. It controls certain elements of the FBI that fall under intelligence. It controls naval. It controls all of the agencies. But in order for her to remove those operatives, she too might also need Hegseth and his Red State National Guards. Okay? Then you have those amongst the populace, boomers, and then these, I'm not going to say zoomers, but the young millennials who are just like their boomer parents, who are these extreme leftists and are going to cause problems with people and start riots, and they're going to try and pull another 2020 again. See, Trump was being nice that year. He was trying to be the statesman. This time around, okay, they're going to be put down. Violently put down. And they have to be. Now, just like Pinochet had to do with Allende for 16 years. to go through an unroute from the Chilean government and their agencies, and even from the Chilean civilian population, the communism, the socialism, the progressivism out of that society and set it free from that cancer, we're going to need 4 years of Trump, 8 years of Vance, and then another 4 years of a Tulsi, a DeSantis, a Ramaswamy. It's going to take at least that same amount of time. And these people are going to have to be. They don't want to be. They don't want to be. I know they don't want to be. They've made it clear that they don't want to be. But the situation both in the civilian population and in the official population at all levels, local, state, and especially federal, is going to require them to become Pinochets. And then you're going to have uprisings amongst the civilian population. And as a Gen Xer, and the older millennials, and actually Zoomers now too. Zoomers voted in large numbers for Donald Trump. So a plurality of the Zoomers too, but mostly Xers and the millennials born before 1990. We are so tired of the shit that the boomers have been pulling to uproot the country that we love, that we remember from the 80s and the early 90s, that the World War II and silent generation tried to bequeath to us, that we are now itching for a fight. And because of the war on terror that you boomers fucked up, we won every battle. We should have won that war. But, you know, Joe Biden, Afghanistan, Barack Obama in Iraq, pulling us out of victory, in defeat, both of you, because we had technically won those, and then, wow, just, anyways. Yeah, Boomer can't even fucking fight his way out of a wet paper bag. They can't lead anybody out of that either. They've proven it. Okay? And y'all blame Bush. Let me tell you something about Bush. He was right on the WMDs. But the Boomer press don't want you to hear it. How do I know? Because I was there. I saw them. Especially in the initial year that I was there. They were there. And I would say that Bush was surrounded by a bunch of boomer idiots, but he himself, actually, before he became governor of Texas, and he was an amazing governor down there. He was one of their best governors. He too, like Donald Trump, was a business owner. Yes, he came from the politically astute Bush family. His father was a deep stater. But if you know the history behind him, you know that him and his father were not on good terms. Oh, they made nice for the public, but they were not. His brother Jeb was like his father. He, on the other hand, was a Reaganite. Remember, this man was a businessman. He had no problem telling people where to fuck off. But once he got into office, and he actually wrote a really good book too, on leadership, business, and decisions. But Bush Jr. was Trumpian, but he was surrounded by deep staters, with the exception of Rice. Condoleezza Rice was the only exception, but the rest of them, yeah, it was kind of like, okay, well, if you want to operate, you will work with these people. Rice was the exception. But they almost snuffled him out, and When Obama took over, we were this close to victory. We almost had Iraq done. And then he fucked that up. And then Biden, of course, fucked up Afghanistan. And we were almost done in Afghanistan too, but Obama fucked that up, and then Biden really fucked it up. Trump almost had us finished there. We almost won. But yeah, you boomers can't lead yourselves out of a fucking wet paper bag lit on fire in the ash. It's just, you guys are, wow. So anyways, the Gen X and older millennial demographic, millennials born before 1990, we are the largest combat veteran demographic since the World War II generation. We're also very angry at the fact that our grandparents bequeathed us something wonderful that we were about ready to grab onto in the late 90s, in the early 2000s, and you boomers fucked it up with Clinton, you fucked it up with Obama, you fucked it up with removing Glass-Steagall, causing the housing crisis, and you fucked it up with Biden. So the Gen Xers and the millennials born before 1990, who are now trained combat veterans and hardened combat veterans, keep pushing. You boomer mentality people in the deep state, you boomer fucking leftist counterculture pieces of shit in the Karens, and you younger millennials bought into that same boomer bullshit. Keep pushing us, because we're to the point now, and Lynch is right on this. Well, now we are just looking for an excuse to fight with you. But a demographic you do not want to screw with, because we will put double X's over your eyes and have no problem doing it, are the millennials born before 1990 and the Gen Xers. Because we and our Zoomer children want our country back. And we've seen it almost taken away from us. And we are the nomad generation, just like the generation that gave us Patton, Bull Halsey, and Chester Nimitz, Douglas MacArthur, Eisenhower, Omar. We are the nomad generation, and we have no problem leading and unleashing absolute scorched earth hell on anybody who would seek to destroy that and those that we love. So Rudyard Lynch, who is a Zoomer, and he's if the guy is the way that I think he is, he comes forward as being autistic on the Asperger side, which for me, for him to do what he does for a living is fucking remarkable. Because he's even stepped up to doing live broadcasts, and sometimes they're a little hard to watch because he does have those tics, but the man's got a great mind. And if he's as socially active and informed as he is, as he says he is, and kind of one of the leaders of this social movement, even in his young age, dude, mad props to that guy, okay? But he's right. And he's reading the room. He's reading my generation. And he's reading his generation. And the guy's 23 years old, which makes him young enough to be my child. Okay? My child. He's not my child, but you get it, right? He said his dad was a boomer. I think his dad was a younger boomer, like what they call a cusper. which was probably born either in the late 50s or very early 60s, right before the Gen X generation came in. But I promise you, his mom was an Xer. Because for him to get the mindset that he has and the thoughts that he has Gen X thoughts. He has Zoomer personality quirks, but there's reasons behind that. And a lot of that's not their fault. But we are itching for a fight. And we will lead our Zoomer children into that fight. And we will be the Bull Halseys, the Chester Nimitz, the Chester Polies, the Matthew Ridgways, the Douglas MacArthurs, the George Pattons. Do not push us any further. Do not give us an excuse to fight on the street. Number one, you don't want to do that, because most of us went house to house in the Middle East. Okay? And we do know how to do that. And win. Do not give us an excuse to fight officially either. Don't do it. Take your L, shut up, sit down, and learn or retire and get out of our way. Because if you keep pushing us, you'll give us the excuse that we need. And then we'll become a generation of Pinochets. This is AL-BINO, signing out.